This video is packed full of some spring DIY inspiration. It's a compilation of some previous videos. I will have the playlist linked down below with all the original content. I've got a bunch of these peat pots on hand for some spring DIYs. I'm going to be using this cream color. It's kind of like an antique white, and I'm going to be painting the base of this large pot right up underneath the rim. You got to keep in mind that these peat pots will absorb quite a bit of the paint, as these are meant to soak up a lot of moisture. So I painted the entire pot base and I allowed it to dry. I'm going to be using this beautiful spring napkin that I had on hand to do some decoupage. I just needed to remove the back layers. There was 2 plies, and I'm using tape to lift those layers off of that beautiful pattern that we have. Of course, feel free to use any pattern napkin that you have on hand. I'll be using a round paintbrush and some water. You just want to make sure that your paintbrush has a nice fine tip at the end. I'm going to outline the image that I would like to use. I have to say, this technique is awesome. I never used to use it. I used to just tear out my image, and I never got an accurate outline like I do with this particular technique. I honestly can't remember exactly where I've seen it, but I have seen lots of crafters use it since I discovered it. So I'm just going to tear out my image once I have it all outlined with the water, and you can see how easily that tears away. And we're just going to see how it looks on my pot, and I discovered that it's just way too big, so I decided to remove the flower that's on there. Again, I'm just going to use my paintbrush with some water and trace around it, and then just tear that image away. You can see that that bird fits on there so much better. So I'm going to go ahead and just trace out another grouping of leaves. And that is because I just needed to fill in that little portion where the flower was. It just looks kind of awkward when it's on the pot, so I wanted to fill that in with some more leaves. I'll be using the DecoArt decoupage glue. I've been asked by several people what the difference is between this particular decoupage glue and Mod Podge is. Mod Podge is just a brand name. I prefer the DecoArt brand. I find that Mod Podge remains quite tacky here where I live, but just use any decoupage glue that you love to use. So as you can see, I added just a thin coat of the glue onto the pot, and I'm just going over the top, and I'm just continuing to go underneath any areas where there was no glue. And then I'm going to finish off again with a coat over top. So here you can see how I'm going to be using that other grouping of leaves that I had torn away. It'll just fill in that little spot there really nicely. So I'm going to be using my scissors to trim off any excess. I didn't want to rip it. I didn't want to accidentally pull the rest of the image off of my pot. Here I have decided to add some more leaves all over the pot. I just felt like it looked a little unfinished just having the bird image, but of course feel free to decoupage any way that you'd like depending on the image that you have on your napkin. So I have all the images I wanted to use on my little pot, and now I'm going to go over the entire piece with a coat of the decoupage glue. I just wanted to make sure that I had a nice even surface all over my pot. You can then set it aside and allow it to dry well. I have this beautiful daisy trim that I picked up from the thrift store, and I'm going to add it to the rim of the pot. Now, as you can see, it is a straight line, and I should have cut all the individual flowers off and then applied them, but I just left them for the most part intact. I did remove some of them off of the strand, but I should have removed them just to give it a bit more of a natural look, but It is what it is. I can go in afterwards and change it up if I find that I don't care for the look. So I'm just going to continue to glue these on all the way around until I have the rim covered. You could add some faux flowers or some leaves. You could even add some other trim or lace. It would be so pretty. So here you can see I'm just cutting a few individual ones, and then I'm going to continue to fill in the back with those pieces until I've got it all covered up. Now I'm going to add some rocks in the bottom. I am needing to add a little bit of weight. I am using just a touch of hot glue because I just didn't want the rocks to roll around on me while I am working on this piece. Next, I'm adding a piece of scrap dry floral foam, and I'm just trimming it down to size. I like to just throw the scraps in the bottom if I can. That just kind of helps to elevate the inside. Next, I'm just going to use some hot glue and I'm going to put the foam block into place. So for a natural touch, I am adding this branch that I had foraged, and you can see that it's got lots of forks in the branch. I needed to trim it down to size. I'm going to poke it into the foam first, and then I will be adding a bunch of hot glue into the hole and then placing the branch back into that hole. It's really important to hold this branch in place until the glue sets because it can fall over if you don't hold that into place. The glue is all set up, and now I'm just going to trim down my branch. As you can see there, I have a little mini wreath, and I am actually going to be using that as a nest base. So I'm just figuring out my placement where I would like the little wreath to sit, and I'm removing any of the branches that are in the way. I want it to sit in the forks just like a natural bird's nest would sit in a tree. Next here, I am using some Spanish moss, and I'm going to fill in the wreath using that moss to give it a natural looking wreath look. And again, I'm just figuring out my placement and just going to cover up that little bare spot there with some Spanish moss. I just didn't like the way it was looking. I filled that in, and now I'm going to go ahead and place a bit of glue on the underside of our wreath just to make sure that the moss will all stay into place. So I'm just pushing that down to create a nest base. And now I'm going to add some hot glue onto the branches and put my wreath into place. Once you have your nest in place, you can go ahead and add more glue as needed. And here I have decided to cover up the entire wreath. I just thought it looked a little bit out of place. So I'm going to cover it up with the moss. I'm just, again, using some hot glue to cover that up. And that also covers up any of the hot glue that may be showing. So now I'm just taking some scissors and I'm trimming off any of the little excess little straggly ends just to give it a little bit more of a cleaner look. So I decided to go and add a few more little branches into the nest, again, just for a bit more of a natural look. This is optional, you don't have to do this, but I just thought it kind of finished it off nicely. So now it's time to work on the base of our tree. As you can see, I just have that foam showing. I wanted to fill that in with some green moss. I figured the green moss would look like the forest floor or maybe a grassy lawn. So I'm just using hot glue just a little bit here and there and pressing the moss into place to cover up that foam. Next, I've got a selection of some florals that I had in my stash. These are from Dollar Tree. I think they're still available from what I can remember. I'm just going to add those by adding a touch of glue. And then, as you can see, these little roses actually match the little bird really nicely that's on the decoupage. Once you have the base decorated the way you like, you can then add a cute little bird to your nest. I happen to have a bird that matched our little napkin so nicely. I just used some hot glue and pressed the little guy into place. Now I'm just going to add a few leaves and a flower to the nest just to help balance it off and just for another decorative little touch. Of course, this is optional. You could add anything you would like to the nest, or you could even just leave it plain. I have to say, I love the way this turned out. Perfect for some spring decor. For this next project, I am using a green painted peat pot. I just did the same thing as I did for the white one. Here I have some rub-on transfers that I got from Dollar Tree. I'm just going to pick out the image that I want to use, and as you can see, I am using some scissors to cut it out. You could use the entire pattern if you'd like, but I just wanted just a few of these images. I really like this butterfly with the French script. So I'm just going to put that into place onto the peat pot, and then I'm going to use a craft stick just to rub it on so it will transfer onto the pot. Now, I admit it was a little bit awkward to get that on there, but I just took my time and I just worked my way around on the pot. If things did get out of place, I figured it just kind of added to that really kind of natural rustic look and kind of a vintage look as well. You can see how beautiful that looks. So I decided just to add a few more little touches. I saw some leaves and some flowers that I wanted to add on here as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut those out and then rub those into place as well using the craft stick. So you can see how well those rub-on transfers work on these pots. Now I want to add just a little decorative touch. So I've got this lace trim that I actually got from Dollar Tree, and it is the perfect width for the rim of the larger peat pot. So I'm just going to add some hot glue. I'm just adding a little bead and then pressing it into place. And I am actually being careful to make sure that I've got it lined up right against the edge. So when you get to the end, you are going to want to just snip off the end. And then I am going to add just a little bit of hot glue just to prevent my lace trim from fraying. You can see how I'm doing that there, and I'm just pulling it all together to create a seam. All right, so again, I am going to glue some rocks to the base just to help add some weight to the bottom while I'm working. And then I've got this cute little bird's nest that I made. I do have a tutorial on how to make these. I will have that listed in the description box as well as pinned in the comments section for you. So I'm just going to figure out the placement, and then I'm going to add just a bit of hot glue to the rim, and I'm going to put the nest into place, and I'm going to hold it there until the glue sets. So in that same bird's nest tutorial, I made these cute little eggs as well. So I'm just going to use hot glue and put those into place inside the nest as well. So I decided that I wanted to add just a few more little branches in the nest as well, just because there wasn't a whole lot at the base of the nest where you could see that it was sitting on the rim. So I just wanted to carry those down just a little further, again, just to create a more natural look. I'm loving how this little spring pot looks. I can't wait to put it on display for spring. So this time around, I am using a little pot, and I am going to be using these leaf rub-on transfers for this particular project. Again, I got these from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to be cutting the images that I want to use out. I'm not sure if Dollar Tree has these particular rub-ons anymore. I know they have other patterns, so I would definitely check out your local store. So again, I'm just going to use my craft stick and I am going to transfer those into place. And then I am going to go ahead and add some more little leaf patterns all over the pot until I get a look that I'm happy with. Once you have all the rub-ons into place, you can then take some burlap. I have this scrap piece and I'm just cutting 2 pieces down into a square shape. And then I am actually going to lay them on top of each other and offset them. But first I needed to fray the edges. I wanted that kind of rustic casual look. So here I am offsetting them and then I'm going to push them into place into this little pot. Just move them around as needed. Now I've got these cute little florals that I had actually got from a store called Dollarama here in Canada, but I know Dollar Tree has something similar, or you can pick some up at other craft stores. So I'm just cutting them down and then I'm going to put them into place inside the pot, and that is it. This project was so easy. So I love to use birch bark in my nature-inspired projects. I have this large sheet of birch bark that I had foraged, and I'm peeling off this thin layers just so I can have some nice pieces to use to cover up my pots. Now, if you don't have birch bark, you could definitely use some scrapbook paper, or I would even try decoupaging some fabric. So I'm going to be using my hot glue gun to apply the birch bark paper onto my little pots. You can see it tears very easily, and if you can't tear it because it's a little bit too thick, you can definitely use scissors. I'm just going to apply some hot glue and then I'm going to press the birch bark into place. And as you can see, I am working in sections. Now, you'll want to work in sections because this isn't going to wrap right around your pot evenly. Here I am having to just trim it down a little bit so it fits right underneath the ledge of our pot. So I'm just going to continue to sort through my pieces and kind of create a bit of a puzzle. You'll also want to overlap some of your pieces as well to create a more natural look. So here's a piece that has a straight edge that I am cutting. You'll want to take that edge and tuck it up underneath one of the natural edges that you have from another piece of bark. That way here, again, it creates a more natural look. So I'm just going to continue to carry on and add the birch bark until my pot is covered completely. If you end up with any little bare spots, you can take some of the tiny strips and just cover up those areas. Once your pot is all covered, you can take your scissors and just trim off the bottom so then the base will sit flat. As you can see, I have 3 pots here, all decorated with the birch bark. And now I'm just cutting some scraps of dry floral foam down to size so that they will fit inside the pots. You can glue them into place, but I didn't bother. Here I am now going to fill them up with a bit of moss. I did leave the center of the foam open so I can stick these beautiful little florals that I had from a Dollar Tree into the foam. I didn't bother to glue these into place either. I don't always glue everything into place, so I can take things apart and reuse them as needed. So these particular florals are actually from I think 2 years ago. I'm not sure if Dollar Tree still has them. I'm sure they do. It seems like they come out with some new ones every year. I think they're just absolutely gorgeous. So I have all my little pots filled, and here I've got this really cute little wooden box. I'm just going to place my pots inside, and here you have it. Here is what the little arrangements look like without the box, and here they are inside the box. I have this beautiful sea spray blue paint. It is almost like a robin's egg blue. It is gorgeous for springtime. So I am going to be painting this large peat pot with that paint. Again, I'm just going on the base. It's all dry, and now I'm going to be using this creepy cloth. I know it's a funny name, but I had actually picked it up from Dollar Tree a couple of years ago in their Halloween section. I actually thought it was a really cool texture, and I loved the natural look of it as well. I also thought that this would be really cool to try doing some coffee dyeing with. So I took the layers apart, and I decided that I wanted to cover the outside of this pot with this. If you don't have anything like this, you could definitely use some cheesecloth, or even some lace would be absolutely stunning. So I'm just going to trim a piece off, and then I'm going to be using my decoupage glue to put this into place. The thing here is that I'm only adding a layer onto the pot, and then I'm going to be pressing the cloth into the glue. I'm not going over the top to add any. I wanted to keep it looking as natural as I could. So I'm just going to continue to add some glue onto the pot, and then I'm going to press this material into place. I actually would like to know what you would use. Would you try something like this, or would you stick with the lace? You could also leave the pot just as is if you'd like as well. So as I was working with this, I did end up having to trim off the bottom a little bit as I was going around until I got all the way to the end. Once you've gone all the way around, you'll then want to trim off the excess. And then I am actually adding just a little bit of glue where the seam is. That'll help to hold it down and prevent anything from fraying. And then you can trim off the bottom as needed. All right, so now I want to decorate it even further. I've got this beautiful trim, and it's got some florals in it. So I'm just going to cut a flower out from this. And then I also have a beautiful selection of some coffee dyed fabric that I had on hand. This is some cotton, and I'm just going to tear some squares, and I'm going to fray the edges. And then this is some ticking fabric that I had coffee dyed as well. And again, I'm going to cut some squares out of that as well. Once you have a few pieces all cut out, you can then start to layer these. Now, this is something that I had done in my last video, and I created like a really casual looking kind of flower look, and I really liked the way it turned out, so I wanted to try it out on this piece. So I'm just going to layer these little pieces of fabric, and then I'm going to put my lace flower or trim flower into the center. I had some leaves cut out as well, but I decided not to use those. So you can trim things down as needed, and then I'm going to be applying these using some hot glue. I'm just figuring out my placement, and then I'm going to go ahead and start to use the hot glue. I am going to work backwards, so I've got my largest piece, put that into place, and then I'm going to go ahead and apply the rest. If you find that the fabric isn't quite sitting properly onto the pot, you can go ahead and add some more hot glue and put things into place as desired. All right, so I had this gorgeous trim in my trim stash, and I really liked the way it looked around the edge of the pot, and it happened to be the perfect width. So I'm just going to use some hot glue to attach that as well. Of course, feel free to use any type of trim that you'd like, or you can just leave it plain. So I wanted to add a little center to my flower, so I've got these beautiful vintage buttons, and I'm just trying to see which one I like the best. I had this cute little flower button. I'm like, oh, that'll work perfectly, so I'm just adhering that with some hot glue. And now I'm taking a flat back pearl, and I'm going to paint one of them with the sea spray paint that we had used on the pot. I wanted to create a little center for the flower button, and I thought that would finish it off nicely. I'm just allowing the little pearl to dry. In the meantime, I am going to be using this jute wire that I had found at, I believe it was Dollarama. I know I have seen something similar in Dollar Tree as well. I'm just going to cut a piece down, and then I'm going to just fold the tips. And the reason why I'm doing that is just so that there's a little bit more of a base to glue to the inside of the pot. You'll want to find the center on both sides of your pot and then add some hot glue and press the ends into place on both sides. And you'll want to make sure you hold those into place until the glue is set. Go ahead and add some extra glue as needed. So our little pearl is all dry, so I'm just going to cut that out, add just a little dab of hot glue to the button, and then put the pearl into place. You can see how nicely that finishes the embellishment off. So I'm just going to add this piece of scrap foam to our pot, but I needed to trim it down first. So I'm just going to again use my craft knife, and then I'm also going to again add a rock to the bottom. That just helps to provide some weight so it doesn't tip over. Now I'm just going to glue my foam into place as well. As you can see, this piece is actually pretty beaten up, but I like to try and reuse my pieces as much as I can. So I've got that into place, and now I am going to get my Spanish moss and I'm going to create a nest. So this is a really easy way to create a nest. You want to just push the moss in around the foam edge and the pot, and then you can continue to add as much as you need. You can glue this into place as well. I am not going to bother, so I can reuse that moss if needed. So now I'm just going to again add some branches to create that nest look. Yes, I am going to be using some hot glue to put that into place. If you do decide that you want to reuse the moss, it's actually really easy to remove that hot glue. So I have some beautiful feathers here, and I am also going to add some of those eggs that I made. So I'm just going to again use some hot glue and put those into place, and then I'm going to add the feathers and I'm going to scatter those throughout as well. So for another little touch, I am going to tie on some of the coffee dyed ticking fabric that I had. This was just a little scrap that I had on hand, as well as a piece of this lace. I'm just tying it on just really simply. You could add a bow if you'd like, and you could add some florals. I'm just going to trim these strands down just so that you can see the other embellishments a little more easily. And then it's ready to be put on display for the spring season. You're going to need an embroidery hoop, a scrap of fabric that's in a circle shape, or you can cut one down into a circle shape. I had this one left over from a project. You'll need a heat pad, an iron, some other pieces of scrap fabric, and I am actually going to be using some fusible webbing for this project, but if you want, you can use a sewing machine. I'm going to start off by laying out my strips of fabric. These are scraps left over from previous projects. I'm just going to lay them out into a pattern over top of the circle of fabric that I have laid out. I'm going to cut another strand here, or strip, from this larger piece of scrap fabric and place that until I have a desired look that I like. I'm just going to make sure that the hoop fits nicely on top. Alright, so now I'm going to lay out my fabrics onto my heat pad, and I'm going to iron them out because they were quite wrinkled. I'll do the same for all the strips as well as that'll make it easier to lay them out and add the fusible webbing underneath. Okay, so you're still going to need your heat pad, and this is the Heat Bond brand of fusible webbing. I'm going to lay my circle down onto my mat here, and I want to cut it down to size so it matches up better to the size of the hoop that I am using. I'm just doing a rough cut, and then you can trim off as needed. And don't forget, you got to save those extra scraps that we create for future projects. So I'm just going to make sure again that this circle fits with my hoop, and just trimming a little bit more off just so I have a little bit more of an even circle. Okay, so follow the instructions on the fusible webbing that you're going to be using. This is a thin strip of fusible webbing. It's what I had on hand, and it's been sitting around for a while, so I thought I would use that. I'm just laying all my fabrics back down onto my circle, and then I am going to just play around with the placement just a little bit, move things around as needed until I have a look that I like, and to make sure that my pattern will fit within my hoop. So I'm just measuring out how much of the fusible webbing I need and cutting it down. It tears really easily as well. I'm going to lift my first strip of fabric, place the fusible webbing down, and put the fabric back on top. I'm going to do that for each strip of fabric. I'm just going section by section and placing the desired amount of fusible webbing down, and then putting the fabric back on top. Now I am just going over this with my iron. It was preheated. The thicker fabrics took a little bit longer for the fusible webbing to stick, so I did add a little bit more heat to those, and now I'm just adding a little bit more fusible webbing where needed, just by lifting up the fabric and again placing another piece underneath. So now I'm just going to make sure again that my hoop fits, and of course adjust your hoop accordingly, and then you can put it all together, and I really like how that looks. So I'm just going to make sure that I have my closure at the top just so it looks all balanced. Once you have that closure all tightened up, you can then pull the fabrics so it lays taut at the front of our hoop. Don't want anything to be bulging because it does really affect the way it looks. All right, so now I'm going to trim off all the excess using my scissors, and again, save those scraps. So I wanted it to be cut off clean and flush with my hoop, so I'm using an X-Acto knife, and I'm going right along flat with the hoop and cutting off all that excess, and I've got a nice clean cut. So I've got that all trimmed off. Now it's time to decorate. You can decorate the front any way you'd like, but again, dove into my stash of fabrics, and I've got all these tiny little pieces. I also have some vintage buttons and my hot glue gun and scissors. So what I'm doing here is just kind of fraying the edges, and then I'm going to start to layer these pieces just kind of haphazardly in a stack. I am creating a really pretty fabric flower. I have seen several tutorials on how to do this online. I've seen lots of images on Pinterest as well as on Instagram for things like this, and I always thought that it was pretty. So I've always wanted to give it a try, so I thought today would be a great day to do that. And I'm going to stack them until I've got a flower look. So once you have the size that you need, you can do this in reverse. I am starting with the bottom, and I'm just peeling them down and adding a little bit of hot glue in the center, and then pressing them into place until I've got them all attached together. Once they're all glued together, I'm going to just place it onto my hoop to make sure I have the right size and look that I like. Just moving it around until I have the placement that I like, and then I'm going to glue that into place. Next, I'm going to be adding a vintage button. I've decided to just kind of go through my buttons to see what I like best. You could add some little beads to the center. That would be really pretty as well. You could even do some stitching. I thought that would be really fun. I'm just using this button here, use some hot glue and put it into place. And I just think this is so pretty. It actually has a really beautiful spring look. For this next project, you're going to need some straws. I had these in my kitchen, so I just grabbed those ones. You'll need, again, some fabric strips from your stash and an assortment of trims. That I've got these chunky yarns. I think they're just so fun. You can get these at thrift stores or at craft stores. Also have some trims here that I had, just a bag of some scraps, assorted beads, and then you'll also need some fabric glue. I'm also going to be using my hot glue and of course some scissors. An additional thing will be a paintbrush. I'm going to be cutting my straw down and placing it onto the paintbrush, and that will allow me to have a nice little handle as we work on the straw. What you're going to want to do is take a strip of your fabric, add a little bit of hot glue to your straw and fabric, not too much, you don't want it to get too bulky, and then you're going to wrap that straw with your fabric. Wrapped it around, you can twist it to create some nice texture any way you want, and then you can just finish it off by trimming off any excess. And I'm going to be using my fabric glue to tack this down. I find that the fabric glue doesn't create much bulk, but of course use any glue that you would like. I also find that the fabric glue actually holds quite quickly, which is really nice. You can see how cool that looks. So now I'm just going to go in and I'm going to see if I want to add some other fabrics, and I decided to add this touch of, I'm not sure if this is like a lining for a dress or if it's satin, but it's a really interesting fiber. So I'm just going to fray the edge a little bit, and then I'm going to again use my fabric glue and I'm going to tack it into place, and then I'm going to wrap it around the fabric that we've already got in place. I decided to twist this again just to create some unique texture. Again, I had seen so many different tutorials on how to create these, so you can check out YouTube or Pinterest and see all the different ways you can make fabric beads. So again, I'm just using my fabric glue and I tack the end into place, and you can see how easily that slips off of our straw. I'm just gonna put it right back on. Sorry, slipped off of our paintbrush. Okay, so now I'm gonna try doing another style here for you, and using this smaller straw that I had on hand. This time around, I am just going to be using this simple cotton fabric that I had. And again, you want to make sure that you add hot glue to your fabric and onto the straw. I admit sometimes I missed the straw, so I had to go back in later on and add a little bit, but you want to make sure that there's a little bit of glue on the straw, otherwise the straw will slip out. So I just did a basic wrap all the way around, just created a simple cylinder around our straw with the fabric. I'm going to again tack it down with our fabric glue. Once you have your fabrics in place for your beads, I've got 3 selections as you can see here, we are going to start to decorate. So I am going to be using this beautiful mohair yarn that I had found at the thrift store. I have found so many cool fibers at the thrift stores, so you'll definitely want to check your locations out. So I just wrapped it around casually. I'm adding just a dollop of my fabric glue and pressing that into place. You can add anything you'd like to these beautiful fabric beads. So for this pink one, I've decided to add this chunky yarn, but I didn't really want those bulky little bits. I just wanted the parts that in between. And again, same thing. I am just going to be using fabric glue. I decided to add this really pretty shiny trim as well. So if you ever find that any of your trims don't stick very well, of course, feel free to use your hot glue. As I discovered here, these ones were not sticking too well with the fabric glue. So I just added the tiniest little bit of hot glue and that held it into place really well. I'm just giving my fabric glue a try again, but again, it didn't hold this particular trim into place. You'll see here in a minute, it came popping off. So I ended up having to go back in and adding a dollop of hot glue on that one as well. I found that these beads were so fun and relaxing to make. I thought it would be a great project to use up those little pieces. You could do this in front of the TV, which is a really great thing to do. It's very relaxing. Same with those fabric flowers. You could do that as well in front of the TV. So I'm just adding a little dollop of hot glue at the end of our trim, just so it doesn't unravel. And now for this one, I am adding a scrap of some lace that I had. Project like this is great to use up all those little scraps that we like to save. So I actually have another little fun trim in my stash here in this pile. I have some trim that's already pre-beaded as well as has some sequins, and I like the neutral color as well. This is great. It just makes it so easy to add a bit of sparkle and some texture. So I added a dollop of hot glue and I'm just going to wrap this strand around this beautiful bead. So for our last two fabric beads, I have decided to use some seed beads to decorate these. So I've got two different sizes of some gold ones, and then I've got some clear white. And I'm using this tool. It is a bead tool, and it's got that wax nib on the end, and you can see how easy it is to pick up beads using this tool. You can pick these up at Dollar Tree, which is a great thing because those stores are available to all of us. I just added a dollop of hot glue onto our bead, and then I picked up a bead and pressed that into the hot glue. Just want to make sure you don't get too much glue into place, just the tiniest little bit. A precision tip glue gun would be great for this. So another way you can do it is add some hot glue directly onto our glass beads and then press those onto our fabric bead. So I'm just going to continue to fill these with some beads. These clear ones look like little dewdrops of water on this beautiful green bead. All right, so again, you can decorate these any way you'd like. I think these all turned out beautifully and they are slipping off of our paintbrushes so nicely. You can use these for all kinds of different projects, or you can even set them aside and put them on display as is. So I thought I would show you how to use one of these beads. So I again went into my stash and I've got some trims and some fabric, some wood beads, and some embroidery floss. I'm just going to tear down my strips of fabric into some thinner strips, and I'm just going to remove any of those excess threads. Also want to just mention that I didn't bother measuring out the length that I needed of the strips. I just kind of went with what I had here. So if you have a long strand, you can just cut that in half so that they're a little bit more equal. And here I have them all cut down to length. And now I'm just going to cut a long strand of the embroidery floss. And I went with an embroidery floss that I thought kind of matched the bead a bit. Next, you're going to want to take your strips of fabric and your lengths of trim and just pile them up in your hand. And you just want to mix them up. And I'm just making sure that I have the green kind of spread throughout my gather here. Next, I'm just going to fold that in half, and then if there's any pieces that are kind of a funny length, I'll just pull those down. Grabbed my embroidery floss and I'm going to tie it off in the center of our gather where we had it folded. And I'm just going to tie a simple knot. So I did go ahead and trim off any little bits that I thought were too long. Again, you can save those little bits of pieces if you want. I'm going to tie a knot in the end of some of these strands as well. So now that you've got your fibers all in a nice beautiful tassel, I'm going to just get another strand of embroidery floss, and you want to wrap it around the top, and that will complete the look of our tassel. So again, I'm just going to tie that off in a simple knot after I wrapped it around a few times. You want to make sure it's tight as well. Okay, so now I want to string our beads on. I found these pretty little green beads and these natural beads. I actually don't know the sizes of those, unfortunately. They came from some old pieces of kids' jewelry. So now I'm just going to take some tape and I'm going to put it on the ends of the embroidery floss just to create a nice sturdy end so I can string these beads on. Started with the little green one and then the natural. Now I'm adding my fiber bead and I'm using a bamboo skewer just to help poke it through because it got caught up on some of the fibers. Worked just fine. And then I'm going to again add my natural bead and the green bead, and then I'm going to tie it off with a knot at the top. So you can leave this string as long as you need. I actually kind of wish I did leave it a little bit longer, and you'll see here in a minute. I think it turned out so pretty. I think it would just make a beautiful gift topper, or you can make some larger ones to use as curtain ties. Here I've added it to the edge of a altered book that I had made a few years ago. I just think it is such a pretty little touch to this book. So I thought that looked so pretty, I decided to add another little accessory, or make another little accessory for the book. I've got my scraps of fabric and trim, my heat bond, scissors, heat mat, iron, and of course my scraps of fabric. I'm going to cut down my cardstock. It's a sturdy cardstock, and I'm cutting it down to 2 1/4 inch wide, and then I'm cutting it to about 7 1/4 inch long, but of course feel free to do it any size you want. I have this nice long strip of fabric. It was a nice beautiful scrap fabric. I love the color. And then I've got all these other little strips again. I'm going to lay them out onto the cardstock in a pattern that I like and using the assortment of fabrics that I like. Of course, feel free to do different shapes. I am just going to go with the strips. So now I'm just going to go in and I'm going to just kind of trim off a bit of the excess. Now you can see there I had a little piece of blue lace. I decided not to use it because I wasn't sure if it would melt when I applied my iron to it. So I end up replacing that, and you'll see here in a bit what I decided to go with. So I just trimmed again my strips of fabric down to a more manageable size, and I'll put those back into place. So you can see here I went with some tree patterned fabric instead of that lace. I think it is a much better choice. And as you can see, I also got my heat mat out. So I'm going to, again, just iron out my strips. It just makes it easier to lay them out and work with the heat bond. I'll also iron out this larger strip as well. This is actually going to be the backing for our strip of paper here, or our cardstock. I'm just going to trim that down to size. And then I'm going to remove any of the excess little fibers. And if you need to trim your piece down, go ahead and do so. I just made sure that I had just a little bit of a hem all the way around. So before I do any of that though, I'm going to put my heat bond onto the cardstock, and then I'm going to apply the backing onto there, and then I'm going to use the iron to put it into place. So you can see how there was a little bit all the way around the edge. I actually wanted that. And then if you don't, of course, just trim it off. I did go in and I just kind of evened it out a little bit with my scissors. Now I'm just going to go ahead and add some strips of the heat bond onto the front side of our cardstock. I'm just making sure that it's overlapping between the cardstock as well as the fabric, and I do that all the way around the edge. Of course, I go ahead and fill in the inside as well. Once you have that in place, you can then put your strips of fabric on the top in the pattern that you like. And then you can go ahead and use your iron to press it all into place. So our bookmark has cooled down, and now I am going to go ahead and use my scissors and just trim off any of the excess around the edge. I did go ahead and fray the edges as well because I don't know, I really like that look. So I did that for each side, and then you can either leave it as is or you can decorate it. So I decided I wanted to add some stitching. So I'm going to thread a needle with some white embroidery floss, and I'm poking the needle through the fabric and the heat bond and the cardstock. I have to say I should have pre-punched my holes, but I didn't, and it did make it a lot more difficult. So it did take me a while to do this, but I have to say I am really happy with the look. So I'm glad I did it, but I think next time if I do this, I would definitely pre-poke the holes using maybe an awl. That would probably work really well. So I just continued to add the stitching all the way around the edge. So I did make sure that I ended at the back side, so then both my strands are there. That way here I can tie off with a simple knot. So again, you could just leave it as is, but I wanted to add just a little bit more. So again, I'm grabbing my little strips of fabric from my stash. I'm going to cut this pretty pattern. It's at the bottom of my bookmark, and I wanted to carry that color all the way to the top. So I just cut a little strip, and I'm going to create a little tab at the top. I'm also going to add this pretty little bit of lace, and I'm just folding that over, and I'm going to just trim it off here, and I'm going to attach it using just a tiny little bit of hot glue, and I'm going to just press that into place. I'll do the same for the back side, and the nice thing about using the hot glue is that it will help to hold that little knot into place as well. So I also decided that I wanted to add just a little tiny staple. I thought it would help to hold all those fibers into place, especially since this is going to get used a lot. So I added one to the back and the front. And then for another little added touch, I decided to go ahead and add a little vintage button. This is optional. You could add a little bow to the top or a little flower. Or even some beads would be a really nice touch as well. But I like the look of a button. So I'm just going through and just deciding on which one I would like to use. Again, I went with a bigger one, and I'm adding it with some hot glue and then putting it into place. I I think it just turned out so pretty. Love it, and I think it looks great with my altered book. Okay, so this next project is fun but messy. I had a lot of fun doing this one. You'll need a bowl, scraps of fabric, scissors, saran wrap, some decoupage glue, a mixing container, and some water. You'll also need a paintbrush, and I'll show you that in a minute. So just going through my fabrics and trying to decide on the color combination and pattern combination I want to go with. I really like this minty green and these neutral colors, as well as that birch bark fabric. I have to say it's my favorite one right now. I don't have very much of it, so I'm glad I had enough for this project because it ended up turning out really, really cute. So I'm just going to cut my strips of fabric down to size. I'm actually giving them a little cut and then tearing them. I again want that frayed edge. I do try to remove some of the loose fibers, but I do want to keep some, but that's just by choice. I just like that kind of a rustic casual look. Now some of this fabric is kind of stiff, such as this one here, so I'm just going to crinkle it up a bit. That just helps to loosen the fibers a bit, and that will help the glue to soak into it a lot better. So I'm just going to continue to cut my strips of fabric down to size, and you can see how I've got them all piled up according to pattern and color. Next, I have my bowl, and I'm going to cover it with the plastic wrap. As you can see, it is on the exterior. I am going to use 2 pieces, but first I need to just put the one on, and I'm going to wrap it over the edge, and I felt it wasn't enough, so I went ahead and used another piece. So once your bowl is all covered, you've got your paintbrush as well as a protective surface. I've got a craft mat that I'm using. I am going to now mix 2 parts glue to 1 part water, and I'm going to mix that up, and you can see the consistency it has. I wanted it to be a bit more runny, but not too runny, because I do want this glue to adhere all my fabrics together. So once you've got a good amount of your glue mixture ready, you can then place a piece of fabric onto the bowl, and then I like to use a paintbrush. I find that I have better control of the glue, but some people will actually take their fabric piece and soak the fabric into the solution and then squeeze it out. I find that is really messy. I've tried it and I didn't really like the way that worked. I prefer the paintbrush, but of course that is optional. So when you place another piece of fabric down, you want to make sure that it overlaps onto the fabrics that are already there. Keep in mind, this is going to soak up quite a bit of the glue, and you will also end up creating a bit of a puddle as you work along on your protected surface. When you get to the top, you want to just add some glue and then press the edge of the fabric over the rim of your bowl and just press that down into place. So I'm just going to continue to work on my first layer, and as you can see, I am going with the neutral colors first, and then I will be going back in and applying the other ones. So I am almost done here, and I found that the fabrics did move around a bit. So while they're still wet, you can pull them and put them back into place and then apply more glue as needed. I'm going to set this aside to dry. I have it upside down on my Mod Podge on the craft mat. And as you can see, I also have a vent above, allowing it to dry faster. It's partially dry now, ready for the next layer. I wanted to partially dry it first. That way here, it would prevent my fabrics from moving around like they were. So I'm just going to try and figure out a little bit of a pattern. I decided to go ahead and add this green one, and I started to apply my glue, and as I was working, I discovered that it was absorbing a lot more of my glue solution. And that, of course, is because the underside is now dry, and that is going to be soaking up glue as well. So just keep that in mind. So I'm just going to continue to add my fabrics. And again, you want to make sure that you overlap your fabrics as you go along. So I'm just going in and adding a few more pieces over top. And then once you have your bowl all covered the way you like, you can then again set it aside, and I allow this to dry overnight. So it's the next morning and it dried really well, and I think it looks so cool and it feels very, very sturdy. So I'm just going to lift up the rim just to loosen it a little bit. And now I'm going in with my scissors and I'm going to trim off the excess. Now, I wanted to do it like this because I wanted my rim to be nice and sturdy. So that's why I chose to do it this way, but you could do it where you don't have it curled over the edge if you want a really rustic and rugged edge. So you can see I'm just cutting along the edge and made it nice and flush, and you can see how well that slipped off. I'm removing the plastic and you've got a beautiful little bowl. You can see that the inside is quite shiny and the outside is nice and matte. And you can see how it took on the shape of our bowl. I can't wait to make more of these. Okay, I wanted to add just a touch of decorative trim. So I have this braided jute twine in my stash of trims. So I'm going to apply that using some hot glue. I'm just trimming off the end just to give it a nice clean edge. I'm going to start off with a dollop of hot glue, push that into place, and I'm going to add just the tiniest bit of hot glue to the end there, and that will help to prevent my trim from fraying. So now I'm going to just continue to just work in sections, just a little bit at a time, add a little bit of hot glue, and then press the twine into place at the rim's edge. Of course, this is optional. You could just leave your bowl as is, but I don't know, I just thought that this was a really nice added touch. So I'm at the end and I just again trim that off, adding a little bit of hot glue and enough so that the end of my trim doesn't fray as well. Again, I just really enjoyed making this, and I am looking forward to making some more. I think it looks so pretty having some strips of fabric scraps that I had. I think it just is gorgeous. So using family heirlooms is not only budget friendly, but these items tell stories of past memories as well as our loved ones. These ones are actually from my grandmother's. They are just so beautiful. These are some beautiful crochet doilies that my grandma had made. I come from a strong line of creatives, as well as these ones are actually bobbin lace, and my great grandmother had made these. So they are a great addition to home decor. So I have this particular book. It was my dad's field journal, and I thought it was just a wonderful keepsake to add. And this is a German poetry book from the pastor that had married my husband and I. Another beautiful treasure. And it's even got the traditional German script lettering, which is such a fun thing to see. So back when my dad was younger, he was into photography and he kept his camera all these years. And once he had passed, I actually inherited this camera of his. It has all the original cases and lenses, and you can take it apart out of its case. And I thought this would be a really wonderful addition to home decor. It's a really great piece to remind me of my dad and what his love of nature was, as that is what he loved to photograph. This camera still works, but unfortunately you can't get batteries for it, at least not that I know of. These antlers actually came from my family's homestead. My uncle had collected them and he didn't know what to do with them. And when he saw that I started to craft with them, he thought maybe I could make use of them. I really treasure these. They get collected as they poke and puncture the tires on farming equipment. And so farmers collect these in the fields. They drop naturally in those fields by the deer and become quite the hazard. So these pieces here is some depression glass. The green one is actually uranium glass. You can tell by the way it glows using a black light. And then the other one is some pink depression glass. Some beautiful pieces from my grandma. My mom had them and she passed them on to me. So this is the part in our house that I really like to decorate. It's a ladder shelf and I keep my recipe books on there on the lower portion, but on the top two shelves, I actually really like to decorate those areas. So I cleared off all the items I am not going to use, and I'm going to start off with the pink depression glass, and I'm adding this bird's nest with some cute little eggs, and that was actually something I had made. I will leave the tutorial for that down below, as well as these word sticks. I think they're a beautiful addition to some decor. I've got a tutorial for that as well. Next, I'm adding the teacup with the little shamrocks. It's one of my favorites. I added a little doily and these beautiful little hydrangeas. You can see those simple little changes really make an impact. And it doesn't take much to add our family heirlooms to give a touch of spring. So now I'm going to work on the top shelf. I've got these bird books along with my dad's field journal, and I'm going to stack them together and I'm putting them on the top shelf. I'm going to make sure I offset them a little bit. So as you can see, I'm also adding some other items. This is Blue Mountain Pottery. It is no longer being made. It's a Canadian company, and I thought it was a great addition, along with these other green vases and this beautiful uranium glass that, again, I got from my mom. I'm adding some full foliage and flowers, some candles, along with some leaves, and the beautiful word sticks that I have made. Again, these are all very simple touches that are so easy to put together, and you can just leave this up year round and just make a few changes, or you can change the look completely depending on the season. So this is my husband's Oma sewing table from when she was young, and another beautiful piece that I like to decorate. So I've just topped it off with a doily, and now I'm adding a piece of artwork that I had painted. I'm trying to include more pieces like that I have painted. Again, this is a family heirloom. I'm also adding this leaf painting that I had done. I've got a tutorial for that down below. Here I'm adding a stack of books, and I'm adding that German poetry book into the stack, along with some other beautiful green books. I'm going to just lay those down, and then I'm just going to make adjustments as needed as I go. I think these are just such fun little touches. I'm adding the deer antler and some more Blue Mountain pottery. These again are made in Canada, and I filled that with some beautiful green hydrangea I picked up from Dollar Tree. Now I'm adding my dad's camera, and I'm just placing that on top of the stack of books. Also adding one of the word sticks I had made. Now my dad was an avid outdoorsman, so I thought I'd add a little touch of nature beside the camera, adding some mossy branches. And then that is it. Just so simple yet so effective for spring decor. So this is a coffee table, and I'm adding this beautiful doily that my great-grandmother had made. And I'm just going to show you how you can quickly and easily just change out a few little things to make your space look way more springy. So I have this collection of rocks and natural little bits. I'm just going to change out the rocks to these beautiful green ones. I thought it was a pretty color for spring. And then I'm going to place my natural elements back in. And I think it looks so beautiful having this wood bowl on top of this beautiful bobbin lace doily. You can see there too, I have another antler in my display. And here's another little quick addition, adding a doily and this beautiful glass leaf plate. And just as simple as that, you've got a beautiful spring look. I found this photo holder that had the wire spiral at Dollar Tree, and I really like this idea. So as you can see, removed the tag. Next, I'm going to be giving it a coat of some gesso. Gesso is a primer that's used by artists to prep their canvases, and it helps to prevent major absorption as well as cover up any dark colors such as you see on this particular piece. So I gave an even coat all over the entire piece, and then I allowed it to dry well. I even added it on the MDF portion of this sign because I wanted the surface to be all even. Here I'm taking my paintbrush and just kind of wiggling it back and forth underneath the wire spiral so I can have some coverage under that as well. I didn't have a light green in my stash of paint, so I mixed some leaf green along with cream colored paint to create a nice light spring color. The gesso is all nice and dry, so now I'm going to give the sign a coat of this beautiful green color. As you can see, I'm painting it in one direction and then I'm going over in another direction, and that just helps to create more of a smooth surface. I used my Cricut Joy to cut out the word prayers in matte black permanent vinyl. So I'm just going to weed the vinyl, and then I'm going to use my transfer paper to adhere the word prayers on the surface of our sign. I thought this was so fitting for the Easter time. Of course, feel free to use any word that you would like on the front. You will also have the back side to decorate as well if you'd like. If you don't have a vinyl cutting machine, you could use stickers, a stencil. You could even use some stamps if you'd like. Once I have the word transferred onto my transfer tape, I am then going to place it onto the front of the sign. Again, remember you have the back side of this as well if you decide that you want to use it for a different occasion. So now I'm just going to rub using my tool to transfer the words onto the surface of my sign. It actually transferred really well. I was really happy with how well this turned out. So I wanted to create some little prayer cards, and so I went into my stash of scrapbook paper and I chose a selection of these cut apart pieces. They're like little journaling cards. I used my Fiskars paper cutter, so I had a nice precise cut around all my journaling cards. You could also use a steel ruler and a cutting blade if you choose, or of course use some scissors. So I felt like this little plaque still needed a little decoration, so I dug into my transfers from my rub-on transfers from Dollar Tree, and I'm just choosing a few of the little decorative elements. And what I like to do is just cut them out, and then I gently put them into place where I'd like them to go before I press them down and transfer them. So as you can see, I'm just gently putting them into place. And then once I'm happy with the placement, I'll push it down with my finger and then use a tool to transfer the image onto the sign. So I'm really happy with how that looks. Now all you have to do is put your little prayer cards into place, and then you have something beautiful for the Easter time or any time of the year. So I found this wood word at Michael's in their wood section. It is the word faith. I had some of that beautiful green paint left over, so I decided to use that on this word. I just added a coat to the front of the word as well as to the edge. I didn't bother to paint the back side of this word. Of course, feel free to use any color that you would like to use for the springtime. Once you have it painted, allow it to dry well, and then we are going to prep our other surface. This is an artist wood panel. I picked these up at a store called Dollarama, but you can get these at Amazon or other craft stores as well. I decided to use my cream paint, and all I'm doing is adding a coat just to the edge of this frame. I'm leaving the back side of this frame plain. These are great to use for different wall decor art pieces. I really love the sturdy surface of these. You could flip it over and use it as a regular canvas as well. So I let the paint dry, and now I'm just going to measure it I'm going to measure the inside of this back panel, and it's just over 8 inches by just over 6 inches. I have this scrapbook paper pad. It's called the Greenery, and I picked this up from Michael's last year. I'm not sure if they have this or not anymore, but of course, use any paper that you would like. I'm just choosing which paper I would like to use for this particular project. You could paint the back side of the panel instead, but I decided to use this beautiful floral scrapbook paper from the Greenery scrapbook pad. Again, I'm using my Fiskars cutting tool to cut the paper down to fit inside the panel. Again, it was just over 8 inches by just over 6 inches. Sometimes I do find that with these panels, the measurements are off just by a little bit, so make sure you measure yours. You can see it fits perfectly. All right, so to attach it, I am going to be using tacky glue. I like the way tacky glue works for a project like this a bit better than decoupage. I am going to spread it out using a plastic card. You could use cardboard as well. And I'm going to just smooth it out to try and get it as even as possible. Next, you'll want to push your paper down into the glue. And then I'm using a bone folder to push out any of the excess. And if there is by chance any bubbles, this will remove them as well. You want to do this before the glue sets. Remove any of the excess glue. You can just wipe it off with a rag. And then continue to work it until you've got a nice smooth finish. I only had a couple of bubbles. I wanted the word faith to be raised up against the surface. So to do that, I'm using these little wood beads. I'm applying them using some hot glue, and I'm putting them into place in a few key points on the back side of my word. I decided just to leave the wood beads plain, but you could paint them out in a green paint or your cream colored paint as well. But I thought that you wouldn't hardly see them, so I decided to leave these plain. Once you have your wood beads in place on the back of the word, now you need some glue to attach it to the back of your canvas. I'm using a mix of tacky glue and just a little bit of hot glue. And then I'm going to center it just by eyeballing it and pressing it into place. You want to set it aside to allow it to dry. And then you can put it on display for the Easter season. I think it's just beautiful. Dollar Tree has these light up words. I chose blessed. And then they also had these light up crosses that has some beautiful cutout detail. Just removing any tags and stickers. And then I'm going to use my little blow dryer, and I want to remove the top panel of the cross and the top panel of the word blessed. So I'm just heating up the glue at all the different joints. This one wasn't held together very well, so it popped off very easily. There was a little bit of damage, but it's on the back side of the cross, so it's not going to affect my project. Next, I'm going to work on the word blessed. So this one was held together pretty securely. So as you can see, I went back and forth with my heat tool along with a metal painter spatula. These are really nice and thin and get right up into the glue and lifts off any of the panels really easily. I found that it broke through the glue really well. So I went around on each joint again, just using my little blow dryer and the tool to lift the word and the cross off. Now I'm using my cream paint and I'm going to give it a coat on the front side of the word blessed and the cross as well. And of course, feel free to use any color that you like to use for spring. I wanted everything to have a nice light and airy look to it, so I chose some colors that looked really fresh. With the cream and the green, I really like that combination for spring. I'm also adding this cream color to the back side of our light, as you can see right here. And I'm also just focusing on anywhere you might actually see the wood. So I decided to also paint the back side of this back panel as well. I'm going to set everything aside to dry. And now I'm going to just use the front panel of the word blessed as well as the cross. And I dove into my stash of vellum papers. I got that one from a local dollar store. This is from a thrift store. And then this other beautiful green one is from Michael's several years ago. And then this I picked up from a store called Zoolily online. I decided to go with this beautiful green vellum. Now, as you can see, the lights are really kind of bright and garish. The vellum helps to diffuse the light and gives a beautiful glow. So to attach it, I'm using tacky glue. I'm adding some to the back of the word blessed, and then I'm going to smooth it out all over the surface using my finger. You don't want there to be too much glue, otherwise it slips around a lot and leaves kind of a goopy mess. So I'm just butting the bottom edge to the edge of the paper and I'm pushing the word blessed into place. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the cross. Again, just adding a bit of glue here and there, and then spreading it all out with my finger. I'm going to lay it down so the bottom butts up right up against the edge of the paper, and I'm going to lay something heavy on top and allow the glue to set. So I'm just cleaning up that little bit of broken wood that was on the one piece. It's not going to affect our project, but I just wanted to make sure that everything was going to join up properly, so I thought I should clean that up. Here I am now using my scissors to cut my pieces off. The glue has set up enough for me to cut away all the excess. I have a hard surface and a sharp cutting blade, and all you want to do is cut around the outside edge of the word blessed and your cross. You do not want to cut out in between the word, and I'll show you what I mean here in a moment. The vellum cut away very easily using the sharp knife. So once you have all those pieces on the outside removed, you can see that there's some paper remaining in between, and that's exactly what you want. So again, I did the same thing with the cross, and now it's time to adhere everything together. I'm going to be using some hot glue for this, and I will be working quickly as the hot glue does set up quite fast, but I felt like this was the best option to have everything put back together. So I'm just adding hot glue to all the main points, putting the cross down. I sit the cross upright so I know that the pieces on the bottom will sit flat, and I'm going to push all the points into place just like you see me doing right here. Once the glue is set, you're good to go. So I do the same thing with the word blessed. Add hot glue to all the points, put the word over top, and then I'm going to sit it upright so that I know it will sit flat on the bottom. Push all my points together until the glue is all set up. I had this scrap piece of wood in my stash and it's about 9 inches long. It is a little misshapen, but it's going to work fine for my purpose. I mixed a little bit more of my cream paint with that leftover green paint, and I give a coat to this piece of wood, and then I allow it to dry well. Once it's all dry, I decided I'm going to use some tacky glue and hot glue to attach these pieces onto the board. I'm just running a bead of the tacky glue on the base of the word blessed, and then I'm using some hot glue to attach it just to the points on each end of the word. Then you're going to put it down into place, and I'm butting it right up to the front edge and the end of this little wood board. I'll do the same for the cross as well. So you want to set those aside and allow them to dry for a bit. once dry, I felt like it was just lacking a little pizzazz. So I had some leftover bits of some rub-on transfers from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to transfer that on the bottom portion of the wood board. And as you can see, it's a bunch of assorted script that I'm using. Of course, feel free to use any rub-ons that you have. You could also use some stamps. Here, I'm just cutting out a little flower, and I'm going to use half of the flower on one part and the other half of the flower on another part of the board. I really like the casual look of this. All it's doing is adding some texture to the piece. Another option would be to add some decoupage of napkins or some tissue. You could also just leave it plain, of course. Use your imagination to decorate these pieces. All right, I felt like the words lacked a little pizzazz as well, so I'm using some Distress Oxide ink and in the frayed burlap, and I'm using a makeup applicator and just adding a little bit of distressing around the edge of the word blessed and around the cross. Just adding some little bits here and there just to help it pop just a little bit more. And then it's ready for display. So I recently found this letter board from Dollar Tree, and I thought it would be really fun to decorate for the spring and Easter season. I'm mixing some cream paint with some water to create a wash. I mixed it up, and then I'm going to apply it just to those wood slats on the front there with a soft brush. I'm applying it, allowing it to dry, and then I'm going to go in and add a second coat, and you'll see the difference in the wood color once it's dry. So here I'm now applying the second coat. Of course, you could use other colors if you'd like. You don't even have to do this, but I really wanted to create a bit more of some interest to this piece, so I really like how that turned out. Next, I'm using my ruler, and I'm just going to measure the inside of the slots and then the width of the sign as well. Found this beautiful piece of scrapbook paper in that greenery paper pad that I had picked up from Michael's. And I'm going to cut 3 strips of this paper. It's just under 2 inches wide. And then I'm also going to cut it down to fit lengthwise as well. Here I'm just making sure that it was wide enough. And it was a perfect fit. And now I'm just going to cut it down to size, and it was about 8 inches wide, or just under 8 inches. So again, I'm just cutting it and measuring to make sure I've got the right size. And again, it fit perfectly. So I cut down 3 strips of the paper, and now I'm just going to look at my letters and choose a word. I chose the word blessed, and I'm going to put these into place. Now, I didn't glue anything because then I thought I could change this out per season. I love the colors that this has for spring and Easter. And another thing too I discovered is that this did not have any numbers. So if you want some numbers, then you'll have to make your own using your printer, or you could cut some out and using some stamps. But I really liked how this turned out, and you could use it for prayers, your favorite Bible verse, or anything you'd like. For this project, I'm using this balsamic vinegar bottle and some cotton fabric along with some burlap scraps, and I'm going to be trimming these scraps down to size to fit on the front side of this bottle. You can see it's a beautiful green colored bottle, and I had removed the label and all the stickiness using some Goo Gone as well as some soap and water. So I'm just going to use my scissors to trim down my burlap fabric first, and then once I have a size that I'm happy with, I'm going to scrunch the material up, and that helps to make the fibers loose so it's easier to fray the edges like you see me doing here. Just gonna again measure to make sure I've got a good size. I'm gonna be using a combination of fabric glue along with my glue gun. I'm going to apply some of the fabric glue to the back of the burlap fabric, and I'm going to use my finger to spread it out, but I'm not gonna go all the way to the top or the bottom edge because that's where I'm gonna be using my hot glue. So I'm just gonna press the fabric down onto the bottle and gently smooth it out. And then using my hot glue gun, I'm adding just a little bit to the bottom and to the top, and that will help to hold the fabric into place. So I really like this casual kind of like farmhouse or maybe even Mediterranean look to this. So I'm going to now just flip it upside down and allow it to dry. Now I'm going to use this cotton fabric scrap that I had. And again, I'm just going to trim it down to size, and it always helps to kind of tear it as well if you're able to. But I don't know, for some reason, sometimes it wasn't working for me tearing it. So I just used my scissors. And then again, I would just scrunch the material up again. And once I have the size that I'm happy with, and again, that will allow me just to remove some of the fibers to give it a frayed edge. I really like that frayed edge look. I just find that it gives kind of more characteristic to the piece. So I would actually love to know, what type of projects do you create using up your fabric scraps? I have done several different projects here on my channel. I'll have those videos linked for you down in the description box, but I'm always curious to know what other people come up with. So let me know down in the comments section. Okay, so as you can see, I'm using my fabric glue again to attach this fabric. Of course, feel free to use any type of glue that you really like to use with your fabric. I know a lot of people like to use Fabri-Tac as well. I just got this particular glue from my local craft store. So my fabric's in place and I allowed it to dry well. Now I'm going to start to decorate this by using some stamps. So I have a collection of some different stamps. I'm also going to be using archival ink. That is a permanent ink. Of course, feel free to use any ink that you have that's a permanent ink. I'm doing a test stamp on a piece of fabric that was in my scraps, and I'm just going to figure out the placement of where I would like my stamped images to be on the front of my bottle. I am using a black ink, but of course you could use a colored ink. That would be really pretty as well. So now I'm just going to see how that looks, and I really like that. Now I do end up adding another little extra embellishment, and or an extra stamp, and I'll show you that in a minute here. But for now, I'm just going to use this stamp. It says Grow and Bloom, and then I've got this beautiful flower stem. And these stamps came from like Michael's, as well as some local dollar stores that are here in my town. Adding this little bumblebee, and then I felt like it still needed a little bit more on the top, so I got this other stamp set that I got in a magazine subscription, and it had a little bee, so I decided to put that at the top, and that filled in the space nicely. I'm using this long strip of cotton fabric that was matching the fabric that was on the front of the jar. It was just a strip that I had, again, in my stash from a previous project. I wanted to see how it would look with it being wrapped around the top of the bottle. And then I also added some jute string, just again for an added little touch that would match the burlap fabric on the front of the bottle. And I was okay with this look. I will show you how it looks here in a minute with some stems, but I felt that maybe it was a little bit too bulky. But again, I just wanted to show you that option if you choose to do that. So here I'm going to show you with the jute twine, just a simple little wrap around just to cover up where the bottle cap screw marks are. So I'm just going to wrap that around again, and then I'm going to tie that off. You can glue this into place as well if you'd like. You could add some ribbon, that would be a pretty touch, or some lace. So I'm just going to tie that off with a simple knot, and then here is what both styles look like. For this next project, I dove into my stash of scrap fabric and I found this beautiful piece that's got these beautiful garden roses, and I'm going to be cutting some strips of about 1.5 inches, and I'm going to just scrunch them up to create a raw edge. Now you'll need several pieces. I love this fabric, it's so beautiful. You'll also need a tin from the recycling bin. This is a literal trash to treasure. So I'm going to be wrapping this tin up with these strips of fabric. You'll need a little dab of glue to start, and then you're going to start to wrap your fabric around. Apply a little bit of hot glue here and there along the way just to help hold your fabric into place. So I'm going to just continue to wrap the fabric around the tin. When you get down to the end, like here, you're going to gently start to bring your fabric down, and then you're going to continue to work around your tin. Once you get down to the bottom, you just want to continue to add your strips of fabric until you've got that bottom edge all covered up. You can trim off the excess and then glue that into place. And then I'm going to flip my tin upside down and trim off all that excess fabric that's on the bottom. And then you can start to decorate the inside. So now I'm going to create a beautiful garden bouquet using some faux florals. These ones are from Dollar Tree, and then I also have some from a store called Dollarama. And what I like to do is just trim down the stems, but I like to separate the wires, and then I just kind of interweave them amongst each other. I don't always cut these pieces apart. I just create a beautiful bouquet, and it looks like I've gone out to the garden and picked these stems. There's no right and wrong here, just be creative with what you have. So once you have the desired look, you can put your bouquet in your tin and leave it at this, but I like to go one step further. Here I'm just adding a few more of the white flowers just to help break up the color a little bit, but I also always love to add a touch of nature. So I have these branches that I collected, and I'm just going to stick a few sprigs in amongst my flowers. I just love this look so much. I think it makes a faux bouquet look a lot more realistic. And here we have this beautiful farmhouse garden inspired bouquet arrangement. I think a lot of us collect these paper bags that stores use, and they have their like business logo on it or stamped on it, or say a pattern that's on it that was from the printer. You can cover that up with some paint, or you could even glue some papers or some fabric onto it. Here I'm covering up this particular stamp. It was from a winery, and I just used some warm white paint. Here I've got this beautiful piece of stitching that my daughter had done years ago, and I thought it would be really, really pretty to use this to decorate a bag. So I'm just putting the excess aside. I'm going to save that for another project. I'm just going to, again, cut this down to size so it would fit into our painted area. Now I needed to paint over the stamp because the stamp was black, and since this fabric is light in color, I didn't want that stamp to show through. I also kind of just did a messy painting technique, as you see there. Again, just scrunched up the material, and I'm fraying the edges just to give a more casual, rustic look. And I have a little extra piece of fabric at the bottom there. We're going to be doing some stamping on that piece. So again, we're going to be using our fabric glue. If you want, you could add some more stitching to this around the edge, but I'm just going to use my glue. So I'm going to spread that out and use my finger to smooth it out, working in sections again. Working in sections allows you some working time so the glue doesn't set up too quickly. This is a great way to use any mementos that your kids have made in the past or grandkids. You can just take little snippets and glue it onto a bag, and then you've got a very unique and beautiful gift bag to use. All right, so I've got these handmade stamps, and this one says handmade with a little rose on it, and I am going to use some green archival ink in fern green, and I'm just going to stamp it onto that little extra strip of fabric that I had set aside. A thinking of you or I love you sentiment would be a really nice touch as well. So I'm just going to apply that ink to this fabric and allow it just to set for a bit. And then again, you could add some stitching to this if you'd like. I'm just going to again add some glue to this and then press that down into place. So I still feel it needed a little bit of a decorative touch, so I'm going to add some of the fabric that matches this stitching fabric. Again, it's just a strip from my fabric scraps, and I also have this jute twine that matches some of the string that is in the embroidery. Again, I can't believe that my daughter made this. I just thought it was so cute, and I'm glad I saved it because it's perfect for a project like this. So I'm just going to tie the string and the fabric just in a loose knot. It's actually a single knot. And I'm going to add some more of the twine around the top. And I'm just going to create a simple loose loopy bow. And then it's ready to be used for any gift. So this project I've been wanting to do for a very long time, and I'm so excited to be able to share it with you. I'm using some Amazon packaging. I've seen lots of people reuse these. I'm going to use some hot glue just to seal up the envelope part and any other loose bits that may be showing. Next, I'm going to be using folding it in half, as you can see here. And then I'm going to be using some white gesso. I'm applying it all over, especially where you see the black. I'm not going to bother going right up to the edge, but I do want to make sure I cover up any of the wording or anything like that, because I don't want that to end up showing through our fabric that we are going to be applying. Now, you could just put a base layer of fabric and then add additional decorative fabrics over top, but I wanted to try using some gesso on here. Again, this has been something I've been wanting to do for a while. So here's our fabric scraps. I have got a beautiful selection that I have chosen to use on this project, and I just love the variation in colors. Now, I have had some people say, oh, why don't you give us some more variation in colors instead of having everything matching? Well, truth be told is I use these items personally, so I'm going to decorate these things in fabrics that I like, but of course, please feel free to use any of the fabrics that you love. So I'm going to cut these pieces down into a more useful size, and I'm going to also just trim them up and fray the edges as needed. I am going to just cut a selection of all these different fabrics that I had already shown you. Some of these fabrics are like old clothing that I had in my stash or from old projects as well. So now I have these beautiful dyed papers that I had created. Some of them are onion dyed, others are avocado dyed. So I'm just folding these sheets in half. I have 4 sheets of each. Of course, depending on how thick of a signature you want to create will depend on how many sheets you add. But I find that 8 is a tolerable thickness. It's not too bulky. I'm loving these papers. It's got such a beautiful pattern on them. So now what I'm going to do is, once you've got all our sheets, this is printer paper, by the way. Once you've got them all folded in half, I'm going to do 1 sheet avocado, onion dyed, avocado, onion dyed, and so on. You could do this with coffee dyed paper, tea dyed paper, any color of dyed paper that you may have in your stash, or again, I could show you a tutorial. So we're going to just set this aside once we've got all those sheets of paper put together. This is all nice and dry now. So now we can start to apply our fabric strips using this card and a paintbrush, as well as our fabric glue. I have this really long strip again that was from a previous project. You've seen me using these strips a few times because I had several of them in my scrap basket. I want to make a tie to go around this, so I need one end to be slightly shorter than the other end. The other end is the end that's going to be wrapping around this. So you can see how it's offset. Once you got the placement figured out, you're going to apply some of the fabric glue. And I'm going to use my paintbrush because I want this glue to be exactly underneath this little fabric scrap. So make sure you add enough so that your fabric will stick. And then I'm going to just gently place this into the glue. You don't want to stretch and pull on this fabric. You just want it to go into the glue naturally. So I just like to work on one side, and then I'm going to go over onto the other side and do the same process. I'm actually wondering, are any of you into making journals? I would love to know because this is something I really enjoy, along with art journaling and mixed media art. So if you're interested in any of that, again, drop me a comment down in the comments section. All right, so back to our journal that we're making here. I am now going to be applying just placing some of our fabric scraps right onto our spine. I want to make sure I've got good coverage around the spine, and I'm going to have enough of it hanging off of the edge so I can wrap it around because I need a little extra strength there. I'm going to, again, apply our fabric glue, use our paintbrush to smooth it out, and then press the fabric into place. Again, I'm not going to pull the fabric taut. I need there to be some give. And the fabric glue actually remains flexible once it's dried. So keep in mind when you are using an adhesive that you are using one that is flexible as well. So again, I'm just going to continue here applying my glue until I've got all my fabrics into place on the spine, and apply some glue where our fabrics are going to be overlapping. Some of those spots you may be needing to use a little bit extra glue, just so you know. So I have the spine covered, and I'm going to make sure that it folds nicely. Now I'm just going to flip it over, and I'm going to just fold those ends around. And I'm just going to, again, just add some of my glue, not too much because I don't want it to get too bulky in around the spine. All right, so we have our spine all done. Now I'm going to just start to work on the placement of my fabrics. I just want to make sure I have enough pieces to cover my cover. Cover my cover. Yeah, anyways, so I did overlap or have an overhang on the bottom and the top, and I actually kind of wish I didn't do that, and you'll see why here in a moment. But I'm just going to continue to lay out my fabrics. I'm going to start off with one side, and then I will go ahead and work on the other side. Once you kind of have a general idea of the layout of your fabrics, you can kind of pull them off, and then you can start to apply your glue and your fabrics. Again, you want to make sure they're overlapping. I'm trying to create kind of a loose quilted look, just a really relaxed one. You can, again, add some stitching, and I will show you an example of some stitching that I had done on another journal that I was working on. Here, I'm just going to trim off any of the pieces that are kind of, I don't know, not straight enough. I didn't want them to be too crooked because it kind of looks funny. I don't know. Just it looked a little awkward to my eye. Also on the edges where the ties are, I do have my fabrics butting right up to the edge, but I am fraying the edges of all my fabrics. Okay, so now you're gonna see me just pull up my fabrics, and I'm just setting them into off to the side, kind of roughly in the area where I am going to be gluing them. Again, these actually don't end up going back onto my cover the way I had them laid out originally. You can take a picture of the original layout that you've got set up and then follow that if you'd like, but as long as you get the cover covered with the fabrics you've chosen, then you'll be all right. So I'm going to start to apply my glue, and I'm going to press the fabrics into place, again not pulling the pieces taut, and I'm going to make sure that I overlap these fabrics as well and fray any of the edges that are going to be showing. So I have the one side all covered up. I'm flipping it over and I'm going to glue down the overhang that I have, but this is where I actually should have just trimmed them off, and I'll show you why I should have trimmed them off here in a moment. But we are going to now again flip it back over, and we're going to work on that opposite side to create the same look you can see here. So I still felt like it needed a bit more, so I'm just going to add some pieces of lace. I'm just going to lay them into place. I'm going to decide if I want the white or the off-white that I have. The off-white has a bit of a sheen to it, so I wasn't sure how it would look. You can see that here. And then this one is the white, and I preferred the white. So I'm just going to, again, use my fabric glue and go right over the fabric and put some of these pieces of lace that I have cut out into place. I don't know, I just like the look, and I felt like it also helped to break up some of that pink, but allowing a bit of that pink to show through. So I have all that fabric in place. Now I'm gonna put a heavy board that's nice and flat along with some added weight. I'm using some paper pads that I had and allowing that all to set. Once set, this is where I'm like, okay, I'm going to use some gesso and cover up all that fabric that's hanging over, or sorry, that was hanging over. And this is when I realized that I should have just trimmed them off because I could have skipped this step. But I didn't think about it at the time. So if you do this, then I would recommend that you just trim them off. But you also have the option of using gesso to cover up that color. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm going to be adding some fabric to the inside, and that color was showing through and it looked really, really funny. So I allowed that to dry. Now again, I'm using my fabric glue. This time I'm using a paintbrush as well as a card. This is the fabric scrap that I'm using. It's a scrap of some eyelet lace. It's an off-white, and it was the perfect width and height for this book. I just needed to trim off any excess I may have. So I'm using a paintbrush to apply the glue to the edge. So I made sure I got it right up to the edge. And then I'm going to apply some glue using the card all over this panel, as you can see me doing right here. This allows me to give some really, really good coverage all over without too much glue or any like thick gloppy spots that will soak through the fabric, because it will show. So I'm going to push my fabric into the glue. And again, I'm not pulling tight because I don't want this to end up stretching our paper, or like, I need it to be able to fold properly. So if you don't pull on it, then it will still fold properly. So I did one side, and now I'm just going to work on the other side. And same thing, add the glue the same way I did before, and then press your fabric into place. And then I'm going to just make sure that it can still fold up properly. And here I'm just going to first cut off the excess fabric, and again, you can save that for another project. Add it to that stash of fabric that you have. I'm adding some weight and allowing that to again dry well. You can see here it still folds nicely, and I'm having no issues. I'm going to just trim off a little bit on the edge, and then I'm going to fray it. I do kind of want a little bit hanging over because I really like that look, but of course do what you like. Now we're going to add our paper. So I've got this elastic string in my stash, but you can also use a headband. I'm going to show you what it would look like with my headband. This headband ended up being just a little bit too small for this particular journal, so you could cut down the journal a little bit up beforehand if you need to, but I still just wanted to show you what that looked like. And now I'll show you what it looks like with the string as well. So all you're doing is adding your elastic to the middle, just like you see me doing here, and you would do the same with the headband. But with the string, I do need to tie my own knot. The headband, they already had welded the two ends together. So I'm just gonna pull my ends a little bit tight here so I can create a knot, and there won't be too much slack, which is what you want. But you don't want it so tight that our journal will buckle on us. So that's what I was finding was happening with the headband on this particular piece. But this works great right now. So I'm just going to trim off the ends, and now all you have to do is slip your pages so that the middle of your signatures or your pages will be underneath the elastic, and it makes for a super easy journal. So before you finish this up, like I said, you could add some stitching, machine stitching like I did here, but you can just leave it as is like we've done here. You could also stitch your signatures into your booklet. I love this. I am so happy with how it turned out. Let me know what you think down below. And I also would like to know if you've made anything like this before. If you're looking for some more spring inspiration, check this video out right here. Let me know what your favorite project was in this video. And I want to thank you all so much for joining me today, and we will see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.